Hello, philosophers. It is Sunday morning. I'm not quite dressed yet, but I wrote out some notes. So I wanted to go ahead and get this out the way before this day carries in front of me. I'm feeling great, excited to just to feel good. You know what I'm saying? So I hope you're watching this with some notes. I'm gonna probably be extensive today. Um, just because I don't know two things. I don't know two things. I don't know if we're going to meet Thursday. Something's going on. I know you all have off Wednesday, and the provost said we should consider getting you off Thursday for those who have work. I don't know, but let's just see how Tuesday goes. So let me lecture first. I'll send the invitation, especially for Keek. I'll send the invitation for the OWL in class Tuesday so that you can see us, even though I'm noticing it freezes up, but you all are still a part of the class. We can see you and that kind of stuff. So let me just get going. Hopefully by now with all this talking you've gotten your video, your notes. Excuse me. So I know at the end of the class I said I thought we're talking Sartre, but according to the schedule we're talking Heidegger today, which makes more sense than talk Sartre, so that it makes more sense. So I'm probably would say he's probably the most, if not, he's probably the most of the systematic existentialists, meaning he creates a system of ideas. Um, so does Sartre in a sense, and this idea of the other or the look. But let's just kind of go. So. Um, First, I have a sort of a note on his phenomenology. So the phenomenology is sort of the discipline that Heidegger and Sartre and Simone Beauvoir were all heavily part of, as well, obviously, as the existentialism that we've been dealing with. Then I'll sort of situate Heidegger sort of in this context, sort of including maybe a disclaimer, especially as a race philosopher. Heidegger, has a sort of an anti-Semitism to him, but mostly, yeah, I'll touch on that. But mostly, we're going to talk about being in time, which is what we're going to be reading. Right, in class, right? Especially the kind of the earlier parts of the work, right? So he has a concept called. Well, I'll do this later, but I also want to remind you to remind me. Talk about his idea of truth as concealment, right? Truth as concealment, right? So I want to make sure I touch on that. So the meaning of phenomenology, right? Obviously, my philosophy majors know that, but some of the other ones may not. So etymologically, or the etymology of phenomenology obviously comes from a phenomenon, right, which is an experience, and logos, right, or logic, right, or obviously logos also means the word, right, when you think about somebody like Phil, right, who's thinking about the New Testament, but it also means logic, right, and so I think I think the idea of study, right, is probably, that's why we don't, the ology as the study of, right? So logos then is the study of, is probably the most important way to interpret that gerund of phenomenology. So the study of experience, right? The study of appearances, the study of phenomena, right? Phenomenology, the study of phenomena, right? Appearances. But of course, appearances alone can be misleading, right? Some appearances are not real, right? And and appearances as phenomena, though, kind of is a little bit more broader, right? So, for instance, I don't know, if you take something real, like the chair you're sitting on, for instance, that's real, right? But some like a unicorn, right? You can just imagine it, right? And there obviously are many more, right? I always talk about the triangle, right? There's no such thing as a triangle, but it's an idea, right? So I prefer to speak to, though, for the existentialists, obviously, we're concerned about the phenomena of experience, or phenomena of actual appearances, right? And so for Heidegger, we incorporate the sort of the human consciousness or human conscious experience, right? And so in this case, phenomenology should be understood as the discipline or study of all phenomena, right? So a key element to note is that phenomenology is more about sort of how, right, rather than what, right? How we experience it rather than what we experience, right? And if we understand it correctly, this is kind of true, right? What something is, if you will, is often the point of departure for any empirical or theoretical science. I don't know, for all you scientists, for instance, heat, right, is a molecular motion, right? Molecules in motion, right? Water, right, is hydrogen, 2 parts hydrogen, a part oxygen, right? This is what things are, right? But phenomenology focuses more on how sort of something appears to me in my consciousness, right? Me as a subject, right? As a conscious subject, how does water appear? How does heat appear? That kind of thing, right? How do I experience heat on whatever level that I'm on, right? The immediate feeling, right? That kind of thing, right? Now that's not to say that a phenomenology is not interested in what is, right? But it's simply to say that the sort of the main methodological the main method, excuse me, Sunday morning, or the point of departure is sort of sort of how the first person perspective of the experience, right? Does that make sense? I think so, right? So phenomenology then should be understood or emphasized in that way as sort of a persistent focus on the tonalities and structures of everyday immediate experiences, right? That's why when I write the books on hip hop, right? I say, well, hip hop is a phenomenological experience, is a phenomenology, right? That's how I'm writing the story from everyday experiences, right? So for phenomenology and for existentialism, sort of much of philosophy has sort of strayed away too far from the everyday understanding of the concrete realities, right? So sort of that is to say, so in short, what is right in front of you every day, right? So phenomenology and existential phenomenology of somebody like Heidegger or Jean-Paul Sartre or Simone Beauvoir, they sort of want to get back to this sort of concrete reality, right? And sort of that sort of engages within all experiences. And here's a good word for you to circle in your notebook: the idea of constant intentionality, right? Intentionality. Now, intentionality is sort of the conscious awareness or the state of always being aware of something, right? So this something, right, or of something else, right? This something else, or this something or something else, we call an object, right? So intentionality is sort of a law, if you will, to be in the spirit of systems. intentionality then would be a law that conscious awareness is always an awareness of something, right? And that something is called an object. So the subject is always aware of the object, right? This must be understood in the sort of the widest possible sense, because I can be aware of many different objects and many different things and even ideas, right? So this is the sort of, again, to think of Heidegger as a system is sort of a law of conscious structures or constant or conscious entities, right? But see, here's the thing. Here's another quote you put in there. Consciousness is always consciousness of something, right? Consciousness is always conscious of something. So I have to do Heidegger then sort of, to me, is most certainly a phenomenologist, right? In the sense that because he is, but kind of think about it. When I think of phenomenology, we think of people like Edmund Husserl and people like that. But he is different a little bit than Husserl, and I think Husserl was mentioned even in your Camus reading through this sort of method we talk about, this sort of strict method, rarely kind of on ontology, if you will. So. And by ontology or existential, we mean what? The being, right? The being of beings, or the being of being, so the study of being, right? The state of existence, right? Being. And the study of beings, people, within a sort of phenomenological experience, right? And that's where Heidegger kind of comes in on, right? Heidegger, along with other concerns, sort of, we should probably describe him maybe even as an existential phenomenologist, right? But what phenomenologists are, obviously, sort of in closing here on this section, is that the idea that where being and existence and predicament of humans take the center stage, right? And that's kind of the way we should look at it, right? Heidegger does have a whole existential system and a method of unique concepts and influences, right? He shares many of the key sort of emotional principles, like I said, the law of intentionality, the importance of sort of like the body, concrete lived reality, temporality, that kind of stuff, right? And so he is a concern. He's concerned about the flesh, right? Which is really what is the foundation, the groundwork of the existential tradition, right? So Heidegger, though, as you would probably read a little bit in Being and Time, he has sort of an idiosyncratic use of language, right? And so some people don't even like it, and I imagine we were reading this in German, right? What that would be like. And so, I think that's probably where we can kind of say that, in that sense. Obviously, we know philosophy is kind of separated. Heidegger probably, well, I don't know. But philosophy generally is separated, even today, in continental and analytical philosophy, right? So generally, you say, I'm a philosopher. Are you a continentalist or analytical philosopher, right? But there are many ways that people have bridged the gap and that kind of thing, and have approached issues and influences from many historical disciplines. Sort of Heidegger defends his use of language, sort of relates to respect for etymology and roots of words. And so, he kind of didn't like the idea of a mainstream standard viewpoint upon key themes of human existence, right? For him, even his idiosyncratic language, sort of, I don't know, it just, for him, like, it's just no easy stretch. Now, that's not what I want to say. Let's just say for him, again, he sort of bridges the gap between the continental and the analytical. I'll just leave it there. Um, I did say I'll mention the idea of anti-Semitism just briefly as a matter of historical fact. Um, he was a member of the Nazi Party, and even though he doesn't talk about the Holocaust in his writing, remember he was a member of the party in the 1930s and 40s, and he lived well into his 70s. Um, what people don't know is that um, he had a long-standing, sort of extramarital affair with Hannah Arendt, right? Which is kind of strange, right? Because she's a Jewish philosopher, right? But also, he had a whole bunch of notebooks that were written with a number of anti-Semitic statements um, and sentiments. Um, and so that's why, when I talk about Heidegger, I can get excited about his existentialism, but I certainly have to let students know that his relation to sort of anti-Semitism is a complex one, but that is a part of who he was, and maybe even a large part of who he was, depending on who you're talking to. What I will say, though, and I think is that before we kind of work further, is that some people would sort of reject Heidegger outright and just call him the because of his anti-Semitism. Um, if I move on to truth as unconsumed, which is an idea that goes into sort of later years and sort of overlaps with his anti-Semitic writings. I think we can see that, maybe we can see that Heidegger remains objective enough not to be contaminated or not to be heavily sort of not to have to reject this sort of his personal and non-philosophical stuff, you know what I'm saying, and affiliations. Maybe, I don't know. Some people just immediately reject them, right? Cancel, right? But maybe we don't have to. I don't know. Hate it or love it. Being in Time, the book from 1927, the one we're reading for class, is the most important and influential work, I think, of the 20th century, of not only obviously for existentialism, but certainly for phenomenology and many other disciplines, right? um, it's polarizing in its opinion, partly due to his language and style. But Being in Time is also completely unfinished with much of his time analysis and how the concept of being is written, right? It was kind of published, we kind of read, those of you who do his history, it was kind of published in a hurry so that Heidegger can take over, this sort of status of being sort of a classic thought leader. From the introduction of the book throughout the whole work, you kind of see two levels of operation, right? And obviously Heidegger has many oppositions and distinctions, but I don't know, it's important to highlight maybe three layers of looking at things, right? The existential, the ontological, the existential and the ontological, right? And being, which is the first term in this conversation, being, right? B-I-N-G, is both sort of existential and ontological, and being in the singular sense, sort of the deeper, more fundamental concepts and structures that he takes on, right? And so the deeper and inner truth of sort of the existential, the ontological, of the ontic, right? O-N-T-I-C. You'll see that in your reading. And why? Because beings only exist because of being more general, right? So again, beings, people, entities only exist because of being in a systematic sense, right? Heidegger, in this sense, is developing sort of his own theory or his own foundation of ontological structures, dynamics, and categories, right? Being that presupposes a being, you know what I'm saying? Kind of, you know. But perhaps the most used and central term of his whole being in time is this idea of being, right? This is nothing other than a human reality and its most basic elemental and existential human form. Being then is essentially being there, right? Being being aware of its own being and always present in the world, right? Again, I'll kind of repeat that because here's where, you know, I was certainly right on the board Tuesday. Maybe we got this thing down, but I got it on the board. But being means being there, being present, being conscious, right? Being there, right? But namely a being that is aware of its own being, right? And always sort of in the world, there, right? The being is sort of always, the being always is, and his words is already thrown into the world. Right? He calls this Throneness, right? So the being thrown in the world, Throneness, right? And thrown, as it is called, in its own lived body and with others, being thrown in the world as a living being, as well as being thrown with others, right? This is what he can call the sort of the essential existential structures of human design for Heidegger, being and being thrown in, thrownness, right? This is his design. Design then because it is inherent questioning and sort of its reflexive ability, a lifeless being, if you will, and even a non-human being are not designed as fully in a sort of a fully fledged sense for Heidegger because they lack the complex self-awareness that humans have, right? So not a fully fledged, so a non-human being is not the same for Heidegger in a full sense because they lack the complex self-awareness that human has. And you can interject a complaint there if you wanna, but that's just what he says. And this might be debatable, right? For those of you animal lovers in the room, those of you know me know I'm not one. But especially higher order animals, right? But it is clear, though, I think, that human reality is far more cognitively and culturally complex, right? Now I'm talking like Webby might talk now, than any other like living being that we're currently aware of. And all this stems from the basic fact that that sort of we're designed precisely because of this open and self-reflective stance on our situation. Self-awareness. A being being thrown with other beings and being aware of this thrownness, right? This has sort of a lot of repercussions, right? If a being is aware of its own existence and can question this existence in an infinite amount of ways, then the ramifications or the consequences of this basic existential and ontological capacity are out of this world, right? And this can be seen in the life of Heidegger, right? Much of which can be said to be sort of systematically unpack, his existential insight. He has another concept called the Dasein, right? Dasen. You should see that in your reading. And put as simply as I can, the Dasein is a term used to speak about the human being in this ontological setting as a being that is aware of its own being and thereby able to investigate itself both logically, logos, and existentially, right? The main idea here is to highlight that Heidegger's observations and analysis with regard to mood and emotions, right? Mood, right? Sort of a manifestation, sort of an ontic manifestation of the ontological structures, right? But one of the most interesting claims that Heidegger makes here is that human design is never on, excuse me, turn it off. Is never on a tune, sort of unattuned, right? We are always in some mood, right? We're always in different moods, right? And this emphasis on moods and a very dynamic picture of moods does not make a very clear distinction, though. Heidegger doesn't make a clear distinction between, let's say, mood and emotion, right? I've read some stuff that emotions are more object specific, whereas a mood doesn't have to be object specific. I don't know if maybe we could think about that and talk about that, but I've read that somewhere that moods are object specific. Emotions are object specific, but moods doesn't have to have a specific object. I don't know. Yeah, I guess there's probably a lot of debate that can be had on this. But if approached, if talked about today, if Heidegger was in class, I think mood would still be an integral part for a full picture of the experience of the Dasein, because he emphasized and analyzed the sort of the significance on mood probably more than anybody else. Then there is angst and anxiety, right, which is understood to be expressed in a way that singularizes you, right? What does that mean? Well, here we go. Heidegger never saw intersubjectivity as a particular problem, but quite the opposite, if you will. How can one explain, much less attain, individuality or singularity if it seems that we are inherently structured by society and its people in a sort of a quite, ineradicable and all-encompassing way? How can we be an individual? How can we be authentic, if you will? Because we're always being thrown into the world with other entities, right? And so the idea of intersubjectivity is a problem. Well, Heidegger's sort of way to sort of spell this out in sort of, as I said earlier, this sort of ontologically existential way, is to say that the Dasein, watch this now, is always already, and being there is always already being with. I know that sounds a mess, and I'll say it again, and you'll read it in your reading, but it's being and being there and being with all at the same time. That's the Dasein. So we are always already social before individual. That's going to be different than what we even talked about Thursday. That's why I was getting confused about the idea of birth as an isolated sense. But Heidegger believes we are already social before individual because of our thrownness into the world. So even further, social phenomena and social structures are so dominant in our lives that the majority of us are going to be governed by this all the time. Right? They say, well, you drink Kool-Aid, Dr. Bailey, you shouldn't smoke. I don't smoke, but you know what I'm saying? This is any structure or mechanism that you have to live by. But it is, in fact, given to you what? By others, and thereby makes you blend in rather than stand out. Right. So habits and ways of being that one man just does on reflexively and the next person does is just kind of a way that sort of interpersonal relations work, or the way the world work. In a sense, it is the inauthentic. It is. I don't know. We got to think about that. The idea of whether it's inauthentic or not. Think about like the sound of a studio audience laughing on TV, to the morals and values we inherit from our family and friends and society at large. They tell you when something's funny, don't they? It is everything that makes you first and foremost a socially integrated person and not an individual in any notable or special way. Go play. Under this conception, the theoretical and practical challenge is, and the existential challenge is just to become a sort of a singular being, to become an individual, one's own authentic self. But where one will be able to break from this, from the sort of the auspices of man, of humanity, even for a minute. I'll go to the beach. Well, the beach, you ain't by yourself. I mean, we fake ourselves and believe in that. Why? In part because we need respite. But truthfully, we're still a part of the Throneness. And it can be broken down from, sort of broken away from a sort of idea of temporarily through anxiety or conscience, or what he also called being a being towards death. Right? What is a being toward death? Well, imagine if you have to write something and it really only depends on you, and it can create anxiety, back to the word we used the other day, but it can be positive if you embrace it. Conscience, then, for its part, is your own sense of self and the existential project that sort of you feel like you have to kind of carry out and be ordered, and sort of carry out and be in order to have an authentic and fulfilling life. And finally, conscience is meditatively and reflexively being aware of one's own death and mortality, and more broadly speaking, the singularities that I maintain. A simple example is people sort of after a near-death experience, and sort of how they have this sort of new-formed energy for life. And to Heidegger, it is easier to just get along as everyone else gets along. The real challenge, right, is to pursue these sort of roots of singularization in a sustained and dedicated manner, whereby one enters projects and entities and breaks free from everyday and normal self to sort of create a new and challenging entity. So the bottom line is, I think, I'll close this out and I'll kind of get to one more point, is that an existential system is seeking to promote thinking for oneself in a sustained, innovative way. And I think this can maybe even explain Heidegger's use of his idiosyncratic language and but it also makes him an anti-Semite, right? Maybe. But surely he himself falls victim to a strong evil spirit of the time. Think about Trumpism today. No offense to those who like Trump. I'm just saying, think about what that means. We're falling victim to a spirit of the time. Right? Huh. I'm thinking about care. I'll bring up care maybe later on. Um, um, Let me kind of close out with the idea of truth, right? I said I was going to mention truth and concealment. I think maybe the most important theme to him is sort of his respect, or the most important respect that Heidegger gives is to this idea of truth. And truth as concealment, which is, sort of very well known and presents a challenge to sort of to a more standard and accepted truth as correspondence, right? Truth is concealment, truth is correspondence. Most of us adhere to a truth as correspondence theory, right? And correspondence, what? Between beliefs and the state of affairs and that kind of thing, right? Heidegger thought that looking at truth in this sort of overly sort of matter-of-fact way, where truth is ultimately correspondence between a belief and a certain state of affairs, was not really the entire picture. This is what led him to propose a sort of a quite detailed analysis, right? He talks about in another project the possible nature of a deeper understanding of truth, where truth is concealed and therefore it needs to be unconcealed, right? Again, etymology, he's concerned about the idea of truth, which is truths, right, plural, that are disclosed through investigation or examination, right? This relates to Heidegger's later, sort of really interest in sort of the cosmology and being attuned to uncover nature, right? Truths, right? But of course, there is a way that even infinitely more to Heidegger, I think, as he remains highly influential, as a greatly structured many. I mean, he's highly influential, in sort of the many, structured parts of existentialism, and continues in many theories that we kind of go through. So look, I hope I've introduced you. 38 minutes. I have a couple more things. I hope I introduced you a little bit some of the basics, not least his important, some of his important influential existential insights. Obviously from being in time, and so hopefully that helps you. The reading is going to be probably the most dense of the readings, so take your time through it. Don't rush. Even don't necessarily have your writing due Tuesday. I can make it due Thursday, especially if we go ahead and take Thursday off. So don't rush through it. All right. Take care, guys. See you Tuesday.